Greetings, I am SupernovaBlade, and I will start this volume of Stories in History with a little bit about some interests I have. I'm honestly not someone who you would expect would have any time as a theater kid, but logically speaking, I was technically someone who would fall under the category of a theater kid in high school. Except, it was quite a roller coaster that was filled with a lot of loop-de-loops, big drops, and so forth. I mentioned back in Stories in History Volume 7 about school clubs that I had a lot of theater stories that I was not going to be able to fit into just that video, and that I would make another new volume to share all those stories. So, here we are. But before I dive into that, it's time to talk about the different art that's playing in the background. The art playing in the background is a part of a series of updated reference sheets I'm making of all of my original characters, and I'm in the process of keeping all that up to date with all my different OCs that I have. I'm not sure how many will be playing for this video. My guess is about 5, and I'm working on quite a few of them as I type out the script. But what I can say is that they will all be featured in the description for your viewing purposes, alongside my Unveil profile that I'm now getting into the process of updating with all of these original characters. Anyway, on to the theater stories. I think my first exposure to Broadway show tunes and that kind of thing was my mom's constant tendencies to play SiriusXM on Broadway. So I did have a lot of exposure to Broadway musical theater songs during my younger years. It's just, she would have to change it whenever it played a song that was not age appropriate, and sometimes she forgot. I think she kind of knew how kind of obnoxious she was about this, because sometimes she would act like it was some sort of sinister plan or something like that. I don't remember much about it other than that it was just something my mom would sometimes do, so moving on. I also remember a few times seeing my father's high schools, which would later be the high school I would attend, fall plays and spring musicals. We watched shows like You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, Leader of the Pack, Seussical, which had its whole other can of worms attached to it, and Godspell. I didn't have any huge attachments to any of these shows, but I did find some of them enjoyable nonetheless. Well, except one show that stood out. A show called Nonsense. Oh my gosh, it is one of the greatest shows I've ever seen. It is so funny, very interactive, and gave off this radiating positivity that just couldn't be matched. I even got some of the merchandise for it. I was cleaning out some old stuff from my closet as I was moving houses and actually found one of those pieces of merchandise and decided, I am going to keep this. But it definitely seemed like the perfect show for a Catholic high school and helped people like me stay entertained, but that's not what this is about. Now, with the background out of the way, on to the main course of the story. When I started high school, I felt like a social outcast, or at least I felt my father and some of my teachers felt that I was a social outcast, and they wanted me to have my own space where I could meet new people and potentially get some new experiences out of it. And so with that, they had me try out Theater Stage Crew, which was led by these two senior girls at the time. I'm going to call them K and L, and I was the young apprentice of the group. I also know the titles seemed a little misleading, but I was never, during my entire time of high school, in the cast of any of these shows I'm going to be talking about. There were a few other people there, but I don't remember much about them, so I'll mostly just be talking about myself, K, and L for this early parts of these stories. K and L were two very different people as the stage crew chiefs, as they were called. K was a much more bubbly type of personality, but often had a habit of showing up late for stuff, while L was much more down to earth and took things a little more seriously. I would also learn that L was a very, very talented artist who would often, if given the opportunity to, would draw something for the set, which I will explain later. There were also the adults who were taking their own roles. We had the main theater director, who I'm going to refer to as Mr. E, and the tech director and power tool connoisseur, who I'm going to call Mr. C, but I won't be talking about Mr. C much in this video because there aren't a lot of stories with him that I'm going to be telling, or at least that were memorable in the first place. Most of the stage crew work was done with Mr. C monitoring us to make sure that we were not getting hurt or anything like that. Most of the sets we were given were not very complex, and a lot of them were just put together by a bunch of 2x4s and drywall. We were also taught how to use power tools like wood saws, primer, drills, wrenches, screwdrivers, the whole shebang. We had a lot of other power tools used for particular circumstances, but I'm not going to be listing them for the sake of simplicity. In fact, we hardly had any contact with Mr. E since he was focusing so much on the cast members for the shows in the Black Box Theater, which had just opened about a year before me starting my time at high school. Also, one more thing. It was also pretty obvious to me to always bring a change of clothes, but honestly, you'd be surprised at how many people would forget their change of clothes, especially on days when we were painting or doing something where you likely wouldn't want to get your shoes dirty. This was another one of the major differences between Kay and Elle. Elle always remembered to bring a change of clothes for stage crew, while Kay definitely made it look like she owned the same pair of loafers all 4 years and she hardly changed them for stage crew. But enough about that lengthy background. Let's get on to the shows, shall we? The first show we had a pretty simple set, because the entire play took place in a single room of a house, a dining room to be precise. In this play, a bunch of different people, portrayed by different cast members, all portrayed different situations while walking in and out of a dining room of a house. These ranged from birthday parties to social gatherings to serious talks about family conflicts, among other things. This was a rather simple set to make, with just a bunch of drilling wood pieces together and attaching drywall to them, and then painting them and adding furniture when it was done. When it came to using the primer and the paint, we always had to make sure we wore these protective things on our feet, and have a tarp around at all times, in order to avoid management being up our asses about it when we would get them all over the stage floor. Because of it, I had to be very cautious about where I stepped, and had to adjust my body in very particular situations to remove them off the soles of my shoes. This would be my downfall a few times with this show, because everything was just so drippy. The cleaning sinks were in the custodial closets right across the hall from the auditorium, but they would easily get on our asses if we left a mess. Flashback to the incident where they tried using oil paint and then they tried dumping it, and although that one didn't involve me, it was a whole other can of worms that the crew had to apologize for. My biggest insecurity was the time I accidentally chipped some of the shine off of one of the tiles in the auditorium while trying to clean up dried up primer that was on the floor. I got the primer out, but I guess things weren't so severe unless you were specifically standing at the point where I was trying to get rid of the primer. The other major thing that caused problems with me was that time I dripped primer and water mix the entire path between the auditorium and the custodial closet. I had to clean it up with a paper towel, and I didn't realize it was dripping that much. However, the show was so long ago that I forgot a grand chunk of a lot of the development. Now I want to mention one of the biggest gripes that everyone in the cast and crew had with Mr. E as a theater director. He was, as a director, very unorganized, even though he started being the director in 1990. This was especially prevalent when it came to his time management, since he, for every show we had him, would always have us stay very late and work on rehearsals during our breaks. Since the show was right after Thanksgiving, he would often have us, both cast and crew, go in every day of Thanksgiving break except for Thanksgiving itself and the Wednesday before. It didn't help that year our school was so exceptional that the principal awarded us an extra day of Thanksgiving break. But when we were given the schedule, Mr. E basically threw the whole "ha ha, think again," and gave us basically that whole day of just working on the show and whatever. We eventually, when dealing with all of these days, got the damn show done! Now, show week, which both in the cast and the crew we called Hell Week, would happen, and for this week, we literally were living in one of the most packed schedules ever. Originally, for days we were going to work on the set, we would have to come in for stage crew from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Our normal school day ended between 2:30 and 3 p.m., depending on the schedule. For Hell Week, on the other hand, our schedule would wager from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. to whenever the school day ended to whenever the hell Mr. E decided that we were done for the night. That would often wager from finishing at 8 p.m. to finishing at 11 p.m. or something like that. Keep in mind that in order to make it to my high school on time with time to spare when adding the commute times and traffic and all that, I would have to wake up at 5:30 in the morning. So many days I would have to stay at the school for longer than 12 hours straight dealing with this show. Too many times, students wouldn't even have enough time to do their homework because of these tight times, which doesn't give an excused absence, by the way. It also adds a whole other burden to the parents having to stay up late to make sure their teenage children aren't staying so late and get picked up at a reasonable time. Long story short, it was a complete fucking mess. Now here's the thing about me working on the show and stage crew. We actually had a rather sizable amount of people, so not everyone was going to get a fancy job, so that we wouldn't be so cluttered. And usually the upperclassmen would get the bigger roles like lights, camera, and so forth. For this show, mostly K and L would get stuff like that, while the lower classmen would not. Or at least, that was how it was under Mr. C and Mr. E. What I had to do for this show was just sit next to Mr. E the whole time and take on small requests, like opening the doors, getting people to the bathroom, that kind of thing. I didn't think that was part of the description of what I had to do, but I wanted to make it worthwhile as best I could, so I wasn't basically doing nothing. The show was okay. It was nothing special. And once the show was done, the very next week we striked the set, cast and crew working together. So we drove the screws out, we put all the wood away back into the wood vault, that kind of thing. Now for the drywall, instead of de-drilling it out, we would basically hammer it with our brute strength. If it weren't for the wood supports, we probably could have easily rammed ourselves into it like we were the Kool-Aid Man. But then we get all dirty. Now, I know I've been spinning all over the theater program at the school, but honestly, I think I really need to appreciate it for what it's worth. So not everything I'm going to say about it is going to be bad. There was one small thing I was grateful for this show. And not just because despite the bullshit schedule and all, we were still able to get adequate meal breaks. It was because of this one thing that seemed kinda like me being a rebel. See, I mentioned earlier that one of the scenes in this play was a birthday party. Well, for this scene, we actually bought an actual cake for the scene, rather than a fake one, considering that most of the food we used for these shows were fake. And once the show was done, we would keep the cake for the next show, and so forth. In order to congratulate the cast and crew for their contributions and whatever, some people would grab a slice of cake. Except, they just mainly wanted the upperclassmen to have the cake. But then at some point I kinda got roped into it. Maybe because us on the crew were also working our asses off or something like that. And I was then offered a slice of the cake, and I ate the slice of cake before even eating dinner. Dessert before dinner, 1. Stupid societal standards, 0. After the show was done, we went to an after party at a restaurant in a nearby city. I kept things rather simple with my order and got a chicken sandwich. Simple as. So, for something simple like that, there is no way they can simply mess this up, right? Right? Wrong! Imagine what it was like to come to an after party awaiting your chicken sandwich only to find out the restaurant got your order wrong and everyone else's order, I think, right. And since this was made weeks ahead of time, I couldn't get refunded. I was pretty devastated, watching everyone else enjoy their time at this after party, while here I am, wallowing in my own misery for just wanting a simple menu item that they couldn't even get right. I thought maybe I did something wrong and things were slowly starting to unravel. Also, for those of you who were curious on how they messed it up, they gave me a bacon grilled cheese instead of my usual chicken sandwich. And truth about me, I don't really like bacon that much. If I have to eat it, I might, but I'll never go out of my way to eat bacon. Anyway, on to talking about the next show. Now that I had finally finished my first play, it was time for a musical. This musical was based on a 19th century novel, but they turned it into a modernized pop musical. I feel like some people might already know a musical I'm talking about if you know things about musicals, but it was a rather recent musical when we started it. At least that's what I'm picking up on based on the Google search results I did while researching for this video. I guess catching it before it becomes a large bandwagon, huh? Working on this musical was a little different than the play, as we had to build a stage extension since it would be a much more open set for the choreography, and allowed for more people to stand out and dance during their times to shine, not be stuck in the background for those scenes. The songs were mostly pop songs from the 1980s through the 2010s, and they were incorporated into the dialogue. I don't remember much about the set building in reality, but from what I do know, that one major set piece we had was a painted and drawn representation of the main character used for the show, that was created by Elle and her artistic abilities that I mentioned before. Now, like the fall play I mentioned before, this spring musical just so happened to line up with a school break. Particularly our spring break. And you know what that means? Mr. E had us go in several days of spring break to work on rehearsing and building the set. So that couldn't get more odd, right? And then I got really badly sick the week before the show. Not ideal. Eventually, we got the damn show done and we put it on, alongside a tour of a place we called Sophie's Subterranean Salon, which is just the underside of the stage, which serves as a dressing room and changing area. I was able to recover by the time this show happened, and then another Hell Week followed. All this just to become the helper for Mr. E once again. But it was another show in the books. However, there was one thing about the show that always stuck out to me with regards to the cast. I had some talks with the different cast members during and after the development, especially with the girls, and they said that some parts of the clothing they had to wear made them a smidge bit uncomfortable. Basically, this musical takes place at a school, and because Mr. E, I guess, wanted to establish it as a school kind of like ours, they had all the different characters dressed in similar school uniforms, so that every article of clothing there was from the same company as the company that makes our school uniforms. A lot of the female students were not really a fan of how short the skirts that they had to wear for the show were, and they were still required to wear them because Mr. E said so. They felt that Mr. E did that on purpose with creepy intent, but I have no way of proving that is true. It was also weird because our high school has a JROTC program, and one of the cast members who was playing a background character was in that program, so that she couldn't wear her regular uniform shoes for the show like the rest of them could. Luckily, she was able to borrow some from her sister, or at least that's what she told me. The other issue that came with this show was some stuff back at home. Now let me explain. About 2 weeks before the show, my family had welcomed 2 new dogs into the house, and when we first got them, they both ran away from home. My parents would have to stay up very early in the morning to look for both of them, which isn't ideal when a spring musical is happening and your youngest child is part of the stage crew for it. So that added some extra pressure to them. Honestly, I like this show even though it had its various faults. Like the last show, we had our after party at the same restaurant, and unlike the last time, they actually got my order right and I got my chicken sandwich. I only needed to wait 4 months to get that damn chicken sandwich. I was finally able to enjoy myself with the other people on the casting crew, and then we did some karaoke, and I sang Angel with a Shotgun and accidentally knocked an entire table over. So that was a thing I had to clean up. Strike wasn't anything memorable, but I also remember during the time of the show, my mother would have to put on a different station whenever a song from the musical had played on the radio, or just play Imagine Dragons, because the musical doesn't have any Imagine Dragons songs. Right when we were finishing striking the set, Mr. E had showed us what the fall play was going to be for the following year, and all I remembered was all the seniors cheering and all of the non-seniors being upset. Without mentioning the name of the show, it was a play based on a book that was not really a great book from what I heard, and honestly made the school feel like an embarrassment for choosing it. But oh, nothing was going to prepare me for the awful experience that would come. I'm going to preface this part by saying, quite simply, this play was one of the worst theater experiences I've ever had. It was the worst one I particularly had worked on. Everything about it sucked. So I'm going to say right here, you just take all the positivity, throw it out of the fucking window. This show was atrocious. First off, this particular show was a Christmas-themed show, and I'm personally not someone who is the biggest fan of celebrating Christmas several months early, since I want to get through other holidays before focusing on Christmas. At the very least, get me through Halloween before we worry about Christmas. But then again, sometimes in the school theater business, you don't really get that luxury. Now, the stage crew is a little different now that K and L were gone, as well as a few other people. So we got a new crew chief who I'm going to refer to as R. R was comparatively much more gruff of a person compared to K and even L. Again, the show was also made with a simple set with a standing part and a stage extension made of wood that was clamped and screwed together. I think we also had to paint something to make it look a little more festive for the Christmas season, but I can't say that for certain. I'm gonna be honest, there actually isn't much I remember about the development of this show, but it was just hard to get through. That's what I do remember. I remember how weak it made me feel. And in her strictness, R would often try to push us to say stuff like, well, would you rather us do nothing? Which looking back on it makes her sound like a complete asshole, but I can tell her heart is trying to get into the right place and she just took things seriously. Now, for the context of the show itself, the show was a show about the nativity, but it was put on by some bratty kids who were ruining everything or something like that. I did hear it got a film adaptation this past holiday season, but I heard it was actually better than the train wreck of the play that we had put on. The thing about this show is that although the set was nothing special, they got this new girl from a nearby middle school to play one of the kids. Another major reason was that I still didn't get any roles other than just sit next to Mr. E and do whatever he orders. Hell, some of the crew members were given the opportunity to appear in one scene just to sing Away in a Manger off-key, and they couldn't even let me do that! What do you mean I'm not allowed to sing Away in a Manger off-key? Probably the most memorable part working on this show was when we printed the posters for it, and we were supposed to take expo markers and cross out the word best from the title and write worst, which honestly was the most accurate way to describe this show. The show happened, a lot of suffering, yada yada yada, and we had the after party, I got my chicken sandwich, and we struck the set, and I was almost kicked out of theater. Wait, what? I almost got kicked out of theater? Yeah, it was because I was getting frustrated trying to stack a stupid chair. I think Mr. E was already upset about things, and I was already upset about the chair not stacking in the position I wanted it to be in. Mr. E kept trying to order me to try harder and harder. I eventually told him, I'm trying, while trying my best to maintain composure, but failing miserably. And then he flipped out and said he'd kick me out of theater if I spoke that way to him, which, for the record, I wasn't even trying to talk back to him. I think we were both just really frustrated, and there was just a slight conflict there. Eventually stacked the damn chair, and I got to stay in theater. I would later talk about the show with a lot of the other cast members, and also other people in the crew, and they said things on the cast side were not much better. Likely because of disorganization, last-minute planning that Mr. E often did. It was also here, I would say, that I was not really on the best relations with Mr. E, but also basically none of the students were. I remember at the back of the stage, there was a very dusty box where someone craved, Mr. E smells in the dust. So that should say how much the students respected him, or at least they had to act like they respected him. I talked about this with my parents, and both of them were like, this was much more fit for middle school, and for a Catholic high school to do this, it feels like wasted talent. So now with that travesty behind me, I can only hope that the upcoming spring musical could be even an ounce better than the play. Long story short, it wasn't the best thing, but it was a heck of a lot better. The second spring musical was a 50s, 60s jukebox musical with a group of 4 female leads, 2 seniors, 1 junior, and 1 sophomore. In this show, 4 girls with corresponding colors perform at their school and then do a 10-year reunion. For the design of the set, this was specifically set to mostly take place in a school gym. Particularly, this musical has a scene where one of the girls pushes another girl into the boys' locker room. Additionally, this would also become the first show where I actually got a role other than to just sit next to Mr. E over and over again. And it's particularly because of this scene. I didn't get any lights or camera or sound or anything like that, but what I specifically had to do is, in the scene where one of the girls gets pushed into the boys' locker room, I specifically had to push the boys' locker room door shut so that we wouldn't see the backside of the stage. It's not much, but it's better than sitting with Mr. E for hours. Now, the preparation of the show was interesting, to say the least, because I have many skills, but do you know what is one I don't particularly have? Inflating balloons. I couldn't do it to save my life, yet I was told to do it. I had to do it for this show, and I struggled so badly that they had to get someone else to do it instead. Even today, I cannot save my life trying to blow balloons, so don't ask me to do anything like that again. I'm also not very good at tying balloons either, so also don't ask me to do that. I was also taught how to properly use a hot glue gun, and also how to properly use spray paint, because I have a whole story from this show about that, because it was a doozy. One of the tasks I was asked to do right before the show, as in this is the first day we were putting on the show for an audience, there were these props we were using for the show where each of the female leads would get a corresponding lollipop with their color that they wore for the show. 1 girl wore pink, 1 wore green, 1 wore orange, and 1 wore blue. So of course I had to spray paint the lollipop each of these 4 colors and have them dry in time for the rehearsal, which considering the time we had, was not going to happen. Now, here's how this panned out. We had just finished gluing the stems to the bases of the lollipops, and I was assigned with painting them the specific color. I set up a tarp out in the courtyard outside the auditorium with the lollipops, trying not to get any of the spray paint on the grass, but they were not so heavy that they can easily hold the tarp down, because I hardly had anything to hold the tarp down. The main issue, however, was that it was a very windy day and I was able to spray paint the different lollipops each of the needed colors. But several times because of the wind, the tarp kept getting blown away, and I had to stop it from getting blown any further into the parking lot. Me trying to catch the tarp and stop it from getting blown away like that. It's like those old silent films where something gets blown away or something runs away and the person is trying to catch it. Put some wacky sound effects, a sepia image effect, and old-timey ragtime over that, and you pretty much have the incident of me trying to spray paint these 4 lollipops in a courtyard on a heavily windy day. In terms of drying, the pink and blue lollipops dried without much issue, but it took a little longer than anticipated to dry the green lollipop, so that was pretty annoying. And then you have the orange lollipop. This was the cream of the crop of the story because this incident was so much of a headache. It's honestly amazing the misfortune that came from it. So this orange lollipop kept getting blown away more than any other lollipop I had to spray paint. Once the other 3 lollipops were dried, I put them away and properly gave them to their respective cast members. But this stupid lollipop, I swear, had gotten blown halfway across the courtyard into the parking lot before I was even able to catch the damn thing. And to top it off, the wind blowing on this lollipop was so strong, it split the stem from the base. So instead of having a whole lollipop, I had 2 parts of the lollipop. And keep in mind, this was about 30 minutes, maybe even less, before we were supposed to rehearse. And now we have to glue one of the lollipops back together. It was a complete shit show of a situation that, looking back, I can just look at it and just feel that I'm impressed by how much went wrong and how I even got myself in such a situation in the first place. What ended up happening was that we glued the damn thing back together before rehearsal, and we asked the cast member just to be gentle with the lollipop best she could, and we would fix any further damages after the rehearsal if any were to come up. I think the only upside to this was that the wind caused the lollipop to dry rather quickly. From as far as I know, we didn't have any other issues with these lollipops for the rest of the show. However, there was also another major thing that kept happening with this show that was entirely my fault, and was the prime example of me having poor communication. And it was regarding the times I was getting picked up, since I didn't have my driver's license when the show was happening. There were 2 instances that stick out to me the most. In the first instance, my grandma was supposed to pick me up, but she completely forgot to, so my mom had to do it, and because I didn't want to be stuck inside of the school, I ended up just walking across the side of the road to a nearby bus stop, and in doing so picked up a random cardboard box, so I just came home with a cardboard box for seemingly no reason, just kinda as a souvenir. The other instance, I had to call my mom to tell her where I was, and my phone had died, so I had to borrow the main assistant's phone, but I forgot to set up a meeting spot, and then I just took a walk through the park, so my mom had absolutely no idea where the hell I was. So that was pretty scary. However, we both eventually found each other through dumb luck, and we got home. But those were 2 very interesting things that happened during the development of this show. I want to point this out about the show. When we were working on it, I legit had to be in this auditorium working on the show every day for at least 2 weeks, weekends included, because of how atrocious Mr. E was with his time management, and how much we had to work our asses off for the show. The show itself went pretty well. I never missed any cues of pushing the boys' locker room door shut so that we wouldn't see the pit band, since we had to stand very near it. I think I might have also had to work on some of the stage lights and curtains at some point, but I can't say that for certainty. Or should I say, curtainty. Anyway, the after party went great, and we got some pictures of the different people and whatever, and we got some fun paper tablecloths to draw on, and I drew a bunch of Drifter X jokes that no one would recognize. Striking the set wasn't very memorable, but it did come with a major announcement. What announcement, you might ask? After this spring musical, it was confirmed that Mr. E would be stepping down from his position as theater director, and we would be getting a new director when the school year started. When this new director came into the scene, we got a guy who was actually quite experienced with doing stuff on and off Broadway. So now we have this new experience that we might need to get this theater program kicking off with a new style. And the fall play we chose was one based on a novel released back in the 2000s. And for the tech of the show, we used some projected backgrounds and a painted cityscape painted by a professional instead of a student, and some of the other transitions and whatever. Now, here's the thing about the show. According to my research, although it was pretty clear this new director knew what he was doing with the plays and musicals from his Broadway days, and he knew how to put on a show, it was very clear that we should have never done this show at a Catholic school. And talking with my parents about this, we can definitely say he was a great theater director, just not a great theater director for the school he was at. Specifically, Google says, this book the show is based on has been challenged and banned in schools due to its use of offensive language, depiction of religious themes, and so forth. Additionally, the protagonist often uses the Lord's name in vain and exploration of atheistic viewpoints, and that has drawn criticism. This show was heavily censored when we did it, but we couldn't avoid the criticism. I say this because I had a teacher who watched it at the faculty viewing, and he was appalled by the fact that our school even bothered to put on such a show in the first place. Now, do you know what was the biggest difference between this new director and Mr. E? This new director actually was really organized with scheduling and didn't have us come in on Thanksgiving break for rehearsals or whatever. So the cast and crew were finally freed from that. Anyway, since this was a mostly tech-based show, we had to put up some walls to allow the projections to not bleed into the background of the stage to make it visible or whatever. Another major difference is that not a single person in the crew would get no job to do. I had to be a backstage manager for stage right on this show. I was stage left for the previous one. So I had to move some of the props and equipment throughout the show when the scene changed. Despite the criticism and the things we really should have not gotten away with, the show was fine and honestly not super memorable if I'm honest. But at least it was less stressful than what Mr. E would have us do. We had an after party at a new restaurant this time because the previous restaurant we went to for the previous 4 after parties went bankrupt and closed down, so we needed to find somewhere else to go. But we found a place that was a little bit closer to our school to host this after party. I don't remember much about this new place, but the cake was really good. And since it was December, I recorded a video of all the different cast and crew members all having the time of their lives dancing to All I Want for Christmas Is You, and I think I still have it saved on my phone somewhere. Now, for the spring musical this year, this new theater director wanted us to do Chicago, which again, I don't think would have been a good idea for the school we were in. But then something happened called a global lockdown, some people call it the panini, and everything had to be done virtually instead. I didn't really get much contact with this new theater director since that incident, and from my father, when this lockdown happened, he mostly remained radio silent to him and the other teachers. And before we knew it, he was gone. So basically we were in this limbo for theater and I didn't know what the heck was going to happen next, since it would have been unsafe to perform unmasked for so long, and it stayed that way until about a year later when we finally got one more theater send-off for myself and the other people in my grade. That was after we got this other new theater director who again had some experience. I will confess something. Originally when I started my time at theater stage crew, I wanted my senior year to be the year where I was a crew chief. But it came rather clear to me that pressing forward, this dream was not going to become a reality, since nobody was really giving me the true training that I needed to reach such milestones. But after a bit of time and an entire lockdown standing in our way, I really felt fine to say I didn't mind it anymore and that I would never become a crew chief. Because if I were to be honest, so much had happened to sour my viewpoints in wanting to become one, and it was mostly for reasons that weren't even my fault. It was mostly the fault of the directors and the systems that set me in situations that removed the joy from the craft. The late nights, the constant pressures, the not getting a worthwhile role that was even helpful. It really didn't do a good job in setting me up to become a future crew chief. At least I still got one last hurrah from my high school theater time, and rather than doing a full-on show, our spring musical was just a barrage of different Broadway show tunes that we called a night on Broadway, and different groups of people were chosen to play particular songs. It wasn't what we were expecting as 9th graders for our time in high school theater to end, but it is what it is. I was listed in the program as just backstage manager left, since I was in charge of changing the props needed for stage left, hence the name. However, now that I look back on it, the days we had to work on the set were very sporadic, and I have no idea what the hell decided what we were going to come in. Probably our cohort days, but I can't say that for certainty. Unfortunately, it meant that some of the crew members during the other cohort day didn't have me to help them with setting up tarps and painting and priming and that kind of thing, wearing the foot protection things, all that. So there was always a bunch of dried up primer all over the stage floor that was never cleaned up, which I was taught to clean that up immediately. If I were there to tell them that, they probably could have avoided it. Oh well. I guess it goes to show that these people are not as prepared in that situation in the ways I was. Or at least this new theater director just didn't care, because I would later learn that could have actually been true. The show had songs from Annie, Shrek the Musical, The Lion King, Hamilton, and so much more. And the show went rather well. It was rather relieving to get one final shot, not just for myself, but for all these colleagues and friends I had made along the way. As the meme says, they're the real treasure. I remember for the last few days of our last performance, the theater director would just order Chick-fil-A at 4 p.m. and have us eat it. And then on the last day, we gave our individual testimonials. And it really shows how forgettable I was in high school theater because they almost skipped over me. We were like, all right, we've got everyone. And then I didn't sit down. So as a result of that, I ended up being the last person to go. I don't know why. The weirdest thing about that was the Chick-fil-A, because I don't particularly like Chick-fil-A's food that much.
But I mean, it's better than going hungry.
I think I was the only person graduating in the stage crew that year, and honestly, the stage crew deserves more credit for what we get. So once the show was done, we had all the pictures taken, we all took our final bows, and every single person was given a hidden invitation, or maybe it was just for the seniors, I don't know. I think it was for everyone. Nevertheless, we were invited for an after party at the Cheesecake Factory. I think what happened was that all the seniors sat in a booth together and we all exchanged farewells and phone numbers so that we'd keep in touch. Before we knew it, the school year was over and we were graduating. I didn't continue my time in theater in college because I didn't want to, because I felt unprepared and I wanted to focus on other things that I had much more of a passion for, like drawing, design, and so forth. However, I would still come back and watch a few theater productions at my university, like American Idiot and Macbeth.
But I never had any intentions to continue.
Because it wasn't in my field of study anymore, and I just wasn't interested in doing it. Plus, I would hear from a few theater majors that hours were long and late and tiring, and I think it would be more manageable for other people, just not me. Honestly, looking back on it now, I can't blame myself since I wasn't even given that many opportunities for growth much, and a lot of it wasn't my fault. So that concludes my story of high school theater. I have nothing against theater, but I understand now that after trying theater stage crew for 4 years, it's just not what I'm passionate about anymore. I would later talk to some folks about this kind of thing, and also with my parents, and they both agree I really deserved better with my time at theater, as well as my time with orchestra, which I already explained in Volume 7. And I just so happened to be part of those two programs during some of their darker and more uncertain periods. So I had no way to avoid it. But sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles. I hear now things have gone better, and the third director left and a new director came in. She has a lot of college and professional experience, and the students love her. So at least that's a step in the right direction for the school. It's a shame I wasn't there to see its new story. And that's about all there is to the story of high school theater, which was surely an experience, but I can't deny the part about it being messy. So with that all in the book, this is where I'm going to end the video. Again, the reference sheets being drawn in the background will be available in the description for viewing purposes as well as my socials. If you enjoyed the video, you can give it a like, a comment, or subscribe to my channel if you see so fit. As I say, the whole shebang. Anyway, this has been SupernovaBlade, and goodbye.